As was joked about in our reading from earlier, we humans are not nearly as logical as we like to think that we are. Study after study shows that humans act primarily out of intuitions and emotions. When we use reason, it's mostly to reinforce or justify our initial emotional reactions. That is a hugely unpopular thing to say in communities like ours that value education and critical thinking. It's so unpopular that it may not have completely sunk in. When we use reason, it's mostly to reinforce or justify our initial emotional reactions. Brains evaluate everything in terms of potential threat or benefit, and then adjust behavior to get more of the good stuff or less of the bad. That could be food or social security or sex or power or safety. Animal brains make these decisions thousands of times a day without referring to reason. Do I approach this or do I avoid it? Social judgments about other people and social situations are particularly intuitive. Within the first second of seeing or hearing or meeting someone, our emotionally driven intuition already has us leaning in or leaning away from that person or that situation. And that initial lean influences everything that we do next. There's an impressively large-scale research project that I came across this week based on better understanding this bias. It's called Project Implicit. It's an online research tool based at Harvard. Anyone can participate online. It assesses conscious and unconscious preferences for 90 different topics, ranging from pets to political issues, ethnic groups to sports teams. The tests are a way to better understand yourself, and it also helps this large-scale research project better understand people's feelings. I bring all that up to say that bias or intuition or whatever you want to call it is real, and we all have it. My hunch is that we won't reason our way into being better people. A different sort of wisdom is probably called for. So most of what I want to share today comes from Buddhist teacher and psychologist Tara Brach. And she invites her listeners, and I'm inviting us today to consider the opportunity to step beyond reflexive responding to a situation and making an effort to incorporate different ways of knowing. One of the buzzwords that may have been a little overused for the past couple of years is triggered. We might also say being hooked when we're jolted into that fight or flight mode, when our world begins to feel really small and the options for responding feel limited. There are some steps we can do to take back. With practice, lots and lots of practice, we can step back from the edge and incorporate more ways of knowing. So Tara Brach offers 3 steps that I find incredibly useful. The first is perhaps the most challenging. When we're in the heat of the moment with intense feelings, we don't have to believe our thoughts. Except for a very few enlightened folks, most of us spend most of our days in virtual reality. And I'm not talking about goggles and video games. I mean, most of us spend most of our times wandering around in a world of our own thoughts and judgments, often ignoring the actual world around us. The most powerful reminder of that, to me, and kind of a scary one, is the ability to drive somewhere that you've driven 100 times. Arriving at your destination, you don't remember anything about the trip. You're so involved with the world in your head, it's like you magically arrived and time stood still. We spend most of our times in virtual reality. The potential for not focusing on the road is dangerous. What might be even more dangerous is the way negative thoughts and feelings can grow into something very vaguely connected to reality. Our overreactive brain that constructs its own reality reminds me of, and you may have had those crystal growing kits that children have. You mix together a couple of different ingredients, give it a stir, and set it aside. And over time, sharp, jagged, hard crystals emerge. They obviously have some ingredients that were there to begin with, but given the opportunity, without being disturbed, they take on a life of their own. But we do have a choice to pause. Don't believe your thoughts, Tara Brock tells us. They may have gone far astray from reality. She tells another funny story to illustrate the idea of not believing your thoughts. She says that one day some high school pranksters rounded up 3 goats. And on these goats, they spray painted the numbers 1, 2, and 4. They released the goats at school. The whole next day, administrators canceled school because clearly goat number 3 had to be found. Our thoughts can take on a life of their own. Now, those examples are pretty benign. The wrench that sort of gets thrown into our psychology, though, is a hiccup called negativity bias. You may have heard of this. With all the splendor of our human mind, it's easy to forget that these brains of ours evolved to keep us alive as animals. And one ingrained piece that worked really, really well for a long time was negativity bias. That means we're more inclined to remember the painful pieces than the good ones. And we pull those painful pieces together to make sense out of our world. In a dangerous world, that serves really, really well. It keeps you away from dangerous food and dangerous places and dangerous animals, and it keeps you from causing too much social chaos in your clan. But for us today, it just means that we're predisposed to remember the negative messages, the inconveniences and discomforts, and to conflate them into something much bigger than is actually there. It shifted an evolutionary tool into a stumbling block. What's a little even scarier is, since we all have these negativity biases, they can fit together like cogs in a machine until we start cranking out negativity together. It's a pretty grim picture. So I'll say it again, don't believe your thoughts. Remembering for half a second that we don't have to believe our thoughts gives us a little space between the situation and reaction. Space allows for some curiosity. How are these thoughts serving me? Are they serving health and wholeness? Or are they serving destruction? And are they related to reality at all? So don't believe your thoughts, she says. The second suggestion is to be able to be more thoughtful in the world is to remember to pause and be present. That concept, be present, is used a lot, and I know it sounds like woo-woo meditation speak, so I'm going to be more specific about what be present means. Being present just means paying attention to the sensations that are coming through your body. Engage with your senses. It helps loosen the death grip that a particular thought can have on your mind. Pausing to look, smell, hear, taste, feel can open us to completely different ways of knowing the world. One of the easiest tricks that I've heard for this, for clearing your mind, and I know it's something that therapists often do, is to go wash your hands. If you have something that smells nice, some nice soap or essential oils, that's even better. It's that combination of the activity, getting up and moving your body, going to a different room with different lighting, feeling the sensation of water, hearing the water, smelling the soap or essential oils. There's the tactile sensation of drying your hands and being clean and fresh. That series of different stimulation gives your brain a chance to flush out some of what is stuck there. Being present to your body sensations can also alert you to some negative sensations and the way they may affect what you're thinking. Now, we all know that being hungry is a bad recipe for decision-making or for anger. This week, I read a similar research. It's a Stanford research project that sounds like a 13-year-old boy's science fair project. The researcher at Stanford stood at an intersection and asked passersby to make moral judgments on some controversial issues. There was a trash can nearby at this intersection. For half of the interviews, the trash can was empty. For the other half of the interviews, the trash can was, scented with fart spray. Sure enough, in Stanford research, the interviewees judged the morally controversial issues significantly more harshly with the presence of a foul odor. Moral judgments are not exclusively out of reason. The experience of our bodies can often shape how we interpret the world, even as we try to evaluate things like justice and morality. Obviously, there is some choice involved here. If we can drive our car for 15 minutes totally out of check with reality, we certainly can walk to the restroom and wash our hands in our zombie state. So for those sensory stimuli to be useful, first you have to notice them, and then perhaps name them. Bright light, warmth on the skin, the scent of citrus. Then we have to be open to allowing those experiences to change something in us. We can reset ourselves if we choose to. This is what being present is all about. Often, too often, we think of the spiritual path as this heady journey of deep thoughts and meditation and books. We think that spirituality is overcoming issues of the body. But often the opposite is true. A lot of spiritual paths invite us to notice and to even cultivate an appreciation for sensory experiences and to know the world around us. The senses of our bodies are invaluable paths to deeper knowing. So don't believe your thoughts. Be present to your senses. And third, Tara Brock talks about remembering love. For me, this remembering love harkens back to the first and seventh principle. When we pause to remember our idea of the inherent worth and dignity of every person, it can be kind of jarring with our take on reality and what we're feeling. There are a lot of times when my thoughts get carried away. Probably the worst place is when I'm traveling by air. There's something about the powerlessness of the situation, of being surrounded by total strangers in an airport, where negative assumptions just bubble up in terrifying ways, especially when flights are delayed. So every great once in a while, in an airport grumpiness, I am able to summon my faith in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And I have literally laughed out loud at myself walking through an airport at my own grumpiness doing this. When we're able to pause and remember love, there are a couple of different ways of conjuring this love up. One is the intention of offering love from ourselves. And that could come from a whole bunch of different images or phrases. We practice one form of Buddhist meditation that's all about that kind of love. The other sense of remembering love is calling on a universal love and asking to be held by it. One of the most basic pieces of human experience that we've all witnessed is the effect that a parent's hug can have on an upset child. It changes the world. But even as adults, when we imagine feeling hugged, it does virtually the same thing in our brains. Perhaps not as strongly or as immediately, but it chemically does the same thing. It settles us and breaks that negative reactive cycle. For me, perhaps, it's the combination of offering and receiving love. In my own meditation, repeating the mantra, I love you, in reference to myself, has really gotten me through the messiest times of my adult life. So however love is served up best for you in your own heart and mind, pause and remember it. Don't believe your thoughts. Be present to your senses. And remember love. It's more easily said than done, perhaps. But these are habits to build over time, something to practice over and over again. Because every time we take one of these very small steps, there's a loosening of old reactive patterns. Every time we pause, we take a tiny step away from that negativity bias and come back to engaging the world with the fullness of our wisdom. We Unitarian Universalists tend to pride ourselves on being well-informed decision makers, anchored in reason and truth. Reason is great, but attending to our emotional lives and how we respond may be a more fruitful path. Amen.